Hello and welcome back. Today we continue our discussion on the European labour mobility policy with an emphasis on residence rights and the posting of workers. We focus on how implementation of these policies is organized in the member states, who's responsible and who coordinates implementation. I want to welcome our local experts, which you already met in the previous video. Welcome to Marcia Zwart of the Dutch Labour Union FNV in the Netherlands, Petru Dandea from the Romanian Labour Union, Cartel Alpha in Bucharest, Romania, and Anthony Falke from the University of Kent in the UK and Vesalius College in Brussels, Belgium. Let's start. What are, in your view, the main challenges in implementing this residence policy?
Well, I think that we can distinguish three broad categories of problems. Firstly, it's relating to transposition. So transposition is the process where the member states adopt legislation and regulations to give effect to the directive. And there are still a significant number of instances where the national rules either incorrectly transpose the directive or national legislation does not fails to give effect to the directive. And so as a result, of course, it means that the directive has not been fully implemented in the member states. And there are still outstanding infringement procedures which the Commission is investigating against a number of member states for having incorrectly transposed the directive, and examples are the UK and Belgium, for example. So those are problems relating to the transposition of the directive. There are also quite a lot of problems in terms of the practical application of the directive. So even though national transposition might be correct and the national law giving effect to the directive is correct, there may also be some problems with how the national authorities apply those rules in practice. It may be unintentional non-compliance by the national authorities. For example, it may be that municipal officials have not received adequate training into how to apply the rules, and therefore they make mistakes into how they apply those rules in practice. But there may be more intentional non-compliance with the rules. So although the directive and the national rules, for example, limit the types of documents which EU citizens and their family members should have to supply when they apply for their residence documentation, it may be that in practice the national authorities impose additional requirements that go beyond the provisions of the directive. For example, we see that with Belgium, where the directive says that for people who don't work, they have to provide evidence that they have sufficient resources not to be a burden on on social assistance. But the directive also says that the member states cannot impose a minimum fixed amount of these resources. And we see that in practice, the Belgian authorities often require a minimum income of €1,000 per month to recognize the rights of EU citizens and their family members. It may also be that the directive has been interpreted by the Court of Justice, and it may be that the national authorities are unaware or willfully choose to ignore these rulings that give further interpretation to the directive. So we can see that the practical application of the directive is actually where the bulk of the problems are with how this directive is implemented in practice. And then, of course, there's a final category where the directive may lead to, there may be problems in the implementation of directives, and that's enforcement by the national courts. And that is an example where the courts may deviate from the directive itself, or may decide to interpret the rules in a different way to how the rules were intended to be. And what the national courts may also fail to do is, where there is a genuine question as to the interpretation of the directive, they may decide not to refer the issue to the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which has the power to interpret directives and give an opinion as to how the directive should be interpreted through the preliminary ruling procedure. So we can see that there are three main categories in how there are problems with the implementation of the directive. It may be transposition, it may be the application by the national authorities, or it may be enforcement by the national courts.
Yes. So is the policy effective according to you?
We can distinguish between effectiveness at the European level and effectiveness at the national level. I think that if we look at the European level, the directive has been implemented. It is there to provide further expression to the rights contained on the treaty as to the free movement of persons. And from that perspective, it is an effective instrument. It is there to lay down the objectives which the member states must then achieve. And I think that the problem is more at the national level, where there are problems in how the directive has been given effect in national law, be it problems in transposition, be it problems in application, be it problems in enforcement of the rules by the national courts. So yes, the directive is effective, but the problem is that its implementation at the national level is somewhat lacking.
How is the policy implemented? Are there any problems with the implementation?
Tons of problems. So you can see that the paper is willing. The theory is quite good, and the law is stipulated very good. Until 2016, what we saw was that it's basically the monitoring of the law, which is a problem, because we have all these institutions which are part of the field. We have the tax office, the SVB, we have the inspectorate, and then we have private partners governing part of the laws. And what was the big problem was that companies would stall forever in not issuing the paperwork. A Romanian company coming here would say, well, we have to get the papers from Romania, but it would take weeks, that would take months. And there was no fines for companies that would basically play these tricks. That has been improved in 2016 under the last government. So we have to see what the effects of this new law is. I think the law changed in November 2016. And there's a little more on paper about what companies have to present when they come to work here. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yes. And what kind of problems are we now talking about? Could you give a couple of examples, perhaps?
I worked in the Eemshaven for quite a while, which was a huge building site, 2 power plants where about 5,000 to 10,000 foreign workers were working. It was thousands of posting companies that came there. And what we would see is that there would be a lot of, the bottom of the chain, a lot of temporary work agencies who posted workers to the Netherlands, would be working here for 3 to 4 months. And when workers presented a problem, we would go with the inspectorate or with the tax office and try to tackle this company. And what you'd see in practice is that within a period of 4 months, there would be huge underpayments. By the time the government, the ones responsible, either the tax or the inspectorate, would come to a misdemeanor and would try to pose fines or to make them back pay workers, the companies would have disappeared already. Basically, in the posting market, you see companies which are here for just a few months. A normal posting is for about 6 months. That's it.
Yes.
It's temporary.
So how is the posting policy implemented in Romania? Are there any problems, to your knowledge?
We used to have recently, let's say, problems in the business sector because I will tell you about a very specific situation now. It was a, let's say, small scandal in the Western Europe about some transport companies using huge fleets of trucks with Polish, Romanian, Czech drivers working for months in the Western Europe. And the complaint of transport companies coming from Netherlands or Belgium or France or Germany was that these employees, these truck drivers are making a completely unfair competition to the local businesses. In a way, this is correct because we know that usually these truck drivers, even in a situation when they are posted, they are the local legislation, the national legislation in Romania remain applicable to their situation, and usually the total amount of money they are receiving as salary, but not only, if they are posted on top of the salary, they are receiving also the allowance for posting. However, the total amount of money they are receiving monthly, it is far below the level of salary of the normal truck driver working in France or in Germany. Now, what happened in Romania in this situation? It was an intervention of the National Fiscal Agency, because the National Fiscal Agency controlled these transport companies, and they said that these companies, in fact, abused the Posting Worker Directive because they do not consider these truck drivers as being real posted workers. Because they say the job place for these truck drivers, it is in the truck. So if the job place, it is in the truck, he or she is not posted. In a way, in our opinion, this interpretation of the law, it is, in a way, a little bit strange. But finally, the result of this interpretation that have been given to the Posting Worker Directive by the National Fiscal Agency in Romania have led to a very difficult situation for these transport companies, because imagine the National Fiscal Agency says that the posting allowance that have been paid by these companies to the Romanian truck drivers, it is in fact a hidden salary, and oblige the companies to pay taxes as normal for salary for this type of allowance, which otherwise have been excluded from the tax purpose. Now imagine that we registered here in Romania some bankruptcy in the transport sector because there were companies which practically couldn't afford to pay this amount of money, which was for some of these companies an important amount of money.
So there are problems also in Romania with this policy. Does it mean that in this example of the transport company you're mentioning, that the tax services had their own priorities and perhaps also related to that interpretation of what the posting directive is about?
Yeah, I think that the fiscal agency in Romania, in a way, endorsed the position of the transport companies in the Western Europe, which complied about the low payment level offered by the Romanian transport companies to these truck drivers. And because of this, the agency took this measure in obliging practically the transport companies to pay correctly the taxes for the entire amount of money paid to these employees, because they considered that Romanian transport companies just speculated the posting worker directive in order to diminish the wage costs for this type of truck drivers.
I hear often from, let's say, trade unions in Western Europe that they feel that the posting directive is often not quite used for the purposes for which it was intended. That is for companies to start competing on labor costs. What is your position on that complaint?
What I can tell you is that in Romania we have 5 trade union confederations which strongly criticized the Romanian parliament in May this year, when the Romanian parliament joined the other parliaments in the Central and Eastern Europe in the procedure of the yellow card they initiated against the European Commission, which this year prepared a new amending document for the posting worker directive. We do not agree with the position of the Romanian parliament, because basically the position of the Romanian MPs have been that these new amending procedures for the posting worker directive, they are saying, this member of the Romanian parliament, they are saying that the Commission just tried to block the Romanian employees or the Polish employees to work in the Western Europe. In our opinion, this is not true, because what the Commission is trying to do, it is just to ensure that these employees coming from Eastern Europe working on posting directive abroad are, let's say, have a decent salary, and they are paid accordingly with the universal applicable collective labor agreement in the sector they are going to work abroad. And our opinion is that this position of the European Commission, it is correct, and in this way we can avoid, let's say, the social dumping, which in many situations, unfortunately, on posting of workers operations can be observed.
Why do companies have such an interest in posted workers? Could you explain this?
It's an enormous way of lowering your labor costs, basically, depending on where you post from. There's, of course, perfect posting. You have the real posting of a worker working for an installation company that has to install a motor on a ship somewhere. Post it for 3 months, being paid according to all regulations. But you have, like, for example, a shipyard I saw, which is right in the next town, where over 100 people have been posted for 10 years. Imagine, it's impossible according to law, but these people have been there for 10 years, posted through different companies. They earn quite a bit of salary for a Romanian worker in the Netherlands, but most of the salary is actually a net salary, because thanks to the posting, they have to be paid at least the minimum wage of the Netherlands, but it doesn't say anywhere that it has to be a gross minimum wage. So what happens is these people make about 600 euros when you are a shipbuilder in Romania. When they are being posted, their minimum income is lowered to about 200 euros, which is the minimum income in Romania. This is the gross income they pay Social Security over, and they receive a daily net allowance of about 75 euros to come to the Netherlands. It's quite beneficial, really. It lowers your labor costs as a company with about 40-50%. This is why posting is very attractive.
So, let's say the posting allows, let's say, companies to pay lower wages. At the same time, are there any risks for the employees, for the people who are being posted?
huge risk, of course. It's not a problem straight away, but if you are a worker and you are being posted for 20 years on a minimum income, which you would never earn if you were working in your own country, by the time you come back to your own country, because you are either disabled, you had an accident, or because you are unemployed, the economy failed, or because you are about to retire, you will find that your social security is basically zip. It's almost non-existent. So by the time posted workers who've been posted for a long time return to whether it's Romania or Portugal or Poland, they will have a very non-existent social security. We've seen a truck driver who came from Hungary, really, and he'd been posted for quite a while. The man reached the age of 65. He went on retirement, and 6 months later we saw him again on the truck and asked him, "What are you doing here? Because you got your pension." He said, "Well, my pension is that low that I have to keep working. I can't live off my pension."
Yes, and what does this do to the, let's say, in your case, the Dutch employers, the colleagues of the posted worker, because they apparently are much more expensive?
Basically, they lose their jobs. This is what is happening at this moment. It's been happening for 5 to 6 years, and it's happening right now in the harbor of Rotterdam, where you see shipwrights who are dumping their own labor force because they're just way too expensive. They basically give people a little severance allowance. It's about 1,000 shipbuilders are losing their jobs in Rotterdam right now. If companies have their way, they will lose their job because they're too expensive, and it's cheaper to hire a Polish or Romanian worker coming from far away with all the costs involved in that, because basically they make a net salary next to posting.
But if you receive complaints from your members, do you act? Do you, let's say, start to see whether there is a problem with posting?
We name and we shame. We go to court. We always also report to the SVB, to the Sociale Verzekeringsbank, in case of fraud. The funny thing is, for us, it's a black box. I make a report and they either tell me that they've received my letter and will investigate. I don't hear what the outcome is. So as unions, you can only do so much. Of course, we can do a lot, but we are quite limited in what we can do in the number of cases that we can tackle.
Do you receive many complaints about this by your members?
Unfortunately not. I do not receive complaints for our members, because usually these guys, which are posted by the Dutch companies working in Romania, in the shipyards from Constanța, Galați, Tulcea, some cities in the eastern part of Romania, even they are paid at this level and they are working very hard for this money. Unfortunately, this money are representing more than double their salary in Romania. So they are preferring this situation, in spite of the fact they know that their colleagues having the same qualification in France, in Netherlands, in Germany, are receiving a salary which can be 5-6 times higher than the salary they receive.
Is this policy effective according to you? Does it work as it is?
If I'm looking just to the Romanian situation, I can say that the policy as it is implemented in Romania, it is okay. Unfortunately, talking about posting of workers is not sufficient to consider the situation of Romania. Here we are talking about the internal labor market in Europe, and it's crystal clear that the directive as it stands today is not sufficient for blocking this, let's say, social dumping situation that we are seeing everywhere in Europe.
Is the posting policy as we have at the moment, including the newly introduced enforcement directive, is this policy effective according to you?
No, not at all. It's It's in theory a beautiful idea. In practice, with 27 countries, with their own laws, with their own regulations, with their own ways of investigating and ways of inspecting, it's impossible to. It doesn't work.
What are the effects which you so much dislike, why you feel it's not effective?
Well, you can see that the effect is that I work in the metal sector and I work in the construction sector, and I meet so many workers who are basically just losing their jobs. You know, there used to be 100 people working in the shipbuilding yard. Now there's only 20, and all the others are Romanians. Why? Not because they're better, not because they work harder, but because they're cheaper. And people see this. And this is not just happening in my country, it's happening in all the Western European countries. And what you see is that basically the normal workers are quite fed up with Europe because they blame Europe for everything that's going wrong. They blame them for lowering the income. They blame them for losing their jobs, and they start voting for parties which have as only solution, we want to close our frontiers again. We want all foreigners out. Europe should be a social union and not a union, a free market union, where companies get all the rights and workers lose all their rights. If social premiums are your first way of competing in the labor market, that means that our social benefit system, which Europe is famous for, deteriorates. And this is what is happening right now. And by having 27 countries in a free market, with 27 inspectorates and 27 tax offices and 27 A1 issuing instances, you will never get to a policy which works and a policy which creates equal pay for equal work in the same workplace. You have to, at the moment, with all the different regulations we have and all the different systems, you have to go back to the work land principle, where the work land is the one responsible for everything that happens in that land. That's the only way to come to one standard.